Nobody wants you. The ballroom of Valdrin Castle glittered with 1,000 candles, their flames reflected in crystal chandeliers and the polished marble floors that had witnessed 3 centuries of royal gatherings. Music drifted through the perfumed air, strings and harps weaving melodies meant to inspire elegance, grace, and the careful dance of noble courtship that defined these winter celebrations. Among the silk gowns and velvet coats, the jeweled hands and practiced smiles, one figure stood apart. Not by choice, but by the silent verdict of those who measured worth in bloodlines and beauty. Alara Venn pressed her back against the cold marble column, her fingers clutching the fabric of her simple grey dress, the only gown her stepmother had permitted her to wear. Around her, conversations flowed like rivers she could not enter. Laughter rose and fell in waves that never quite reached her shore. She had learned long ago that invisibility was safer than attention, that silence drew fewer wounds than speech. But tonight, even invisibility failed her. Her stepsister Corinne approached with 2 companions, their gowns shimmering in shades of rose and gold. Corinne's smile was beautiful, the kind of beauty that concealed thorns beneath petals. Still hiding by the pillars? Corinne's voice carried just far enough for nearby nobles to hear. I told Mother it was pointless bringing you. Nobody wants you here, Ilara. Nobody has ever wanted you anywhere. The companions giggled behind gloved hands. A lord standing nearby turned with mild interest, as if observing a mildly amusing scene at a play. Ilara said nothing. She had learned that words only fed cruelty, that silence sometimes starved it instead. But her hands trembled slightly, and she lowered her eyes to hide whatever might show in them. Perhaps, Corinne continued, leaning closer with full sweetness, you should find the servants' quarters. You'd fit better there, wouldn't you? With the other unwanted things. More laughter. More glances. The music continued, indifferent to small cruelties enacted in shadowed corners. Ilara's jaw tightened. She did not cry. She had not cried in years, but something in her chest ached with a familiar weight. The weight of being unseen. The weight of being worth nothing to the only family she had left. She did not notice that across the vast ballroom, someone had stopped moving entirely. Aldrich Varen, king of the northern reaches and lord of the ancient bloodlines, stood near the dais where his throne had been placed for the evening's festivities. He had ruled for 400 years, though he appeared no older than a man in his middle decades, dark hair touched with silver at the temples, pale features carved with the patience of centuries, eyes the color of winter twilight. He had attended 1,000 such gatherings. He had watched generations of nobles rise and fall, had seen ambitions bloom and wither, had grown weary of the endless performance of power and beauty that defined mortal courts. The vampiric lords and ladies who served him were little better, perhaps worse, for they had eternity to refine their cruelties. He had been preparing to withdraw for the evening when something caught his attention. Not sound. Not movement. Something quieter than either. Through the crowded hall, past the swirling gowns and bowing courtiers, he saw a young woman standing alone against a marble column. He saw her stepsister's cruel smile. He saw the laughter of companions who had never known true hardship. And he saw the young woman's response, the way she did not flee, did not weep, did not surrender her composure even as each word struck like a blade. She simply stood there, enduring, refusing to break. In 4 centuries of rule, Aldrich had seen countless displays of strength, warriors charging into battle, lords defending their honor, ladies wielding what-like weapons. But genuine courage was rarer. The courage to remain standing when the world insisted you should fall. The courage to maintain dignity when dignity earned nothing. The courage to be gentle in a world that rewarded cruelty. He watched as her stepsister delivered the final blow, the suggestion that she belonged with unwanted things, and something shifted in his ancient heart. He had not felt such clarity in decades. His advisers moved toward him as he stepped away from the dais, concern flickering across their practiced faces. "Your Majesty?" Lord Theron inquired. "Is something amiss?" Aldrich did not answer. He simply walked. The ballroom began to notice. Conversations faltered. Dancers paused mid-step. The music continued for a moment, then stumbled into uncertain silence as the Vampire King crossed the marble floor with purpose that had nothing to do with politics or power. Each step echoed in the growing quiet. Nobles drew back, uncertain, whispering behind fans and gloved hands. Corinne's smile faltered as she realized the king's trajectory. Her companions grew pale. The lord who had been observing suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. Aldrich stopped before the marble column where Alara stood frozen, her eyes wide with confusion and the beginning of fear. She was no one, a minor noble's stepdaughter, a name that appeared on no important lists, a face that graced no portraits. The Vampire King had no reason to notice her existence. Yet he stood before her now, his expression unreadable, his presence vast and still as a mountain. "My lady," he said quietly. His voice was not loud, but in the utter silence of the hall, it carried like a bell. "I believe I have not had the pleasure of your introduction." Alara's lips parted, but no sound emerged. She glanced at Corinne, at the shocked courtiers, at the impossible reality of what was happening. She managed. "I am no one, your Majesty. Ilara Ven. Just are no one." Aldrich studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he extended his hand. "I have found," he said, "that those who call themselves no one often carry more truth than those who proclaim themselves everything." His pale eyes met hers, and in them she saw no mockery, no hidden cruelty, no political calculation. Only a strange, quiet certainty. "Would you honor me with the next dance, Lady Alara?" The ballroom held its breath. Alara looked at his outstretched hand, pale, steady, patient. She looked at her own trembling fingers. She thought of every voice that had ever told her she was unwanted, unworthy, invisible. And then, against every instinct that whispered she did not deserve this moment, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, cool, gentle, impossibly careful. The music began again, different now. Softer. A melody meant for two. In the weeks that followed, the court could speak of nothing else. Why had the vampire king chosen the plain stepdaughter? What political advantage could possibly exist in elevating someone so thoroughly beneath notice? The theories multiplied: secret bloodlines, hidden beauty, enchantment, conspiracy. None came close to the truth, because none could conceive of it. Aldrich had chosen her because she had stood alone and remained standing. Because cruelty had not broken her gentleness. Because in a room full of performers, she had simply been herself. He summoned her to the castle 3 days after the ball. Not to court, but to the quiet library in the northern tower where he spent his mornings reading histories and correspondence. Alara arrived in her grey dress. It was, she explained with quiet embarrassment, the finest she owned. Her stepmother had laughed when the royal summons arrived, certain it was a mistake or a cruel jest. "Sit," Ealdric said, gesturing to a chair near the fire. "You are cold." "I am always cold," as she admitted, then flushed. "Forgive me. I should not." "Speak freely here." He settled into the chair across from her, a book open in his lap though he did not look at it. "I have lived long enough to grow weary of careful words. Tell me about your family." She hesitated. The firelight painted her features in warm gold, softening the plainness that court beauty standards would have condemned. "There is little to tell, Your Majesty. My father died when I was young. My stepmother manages the household. My stepsister is beautiful and accomplished." A pause. "I'm neither." "What are you, then?" The question startled her. No one had ever asked. "I read," she said finally. "When permitted. I tend the garden in the eastern courtyard, the one no one uses. I help the kitchen staff sometimes, when my stepmother is occupied elsewhere." She folded her hands in her lap. "I am useful for small things. Invisible for important ones." Aldrich was quiet for a long moment. Then he rose, crossed to a shelf, and withdrew a slim volume bound in worn leather. "This," he said, placing it in her hands, "is a history of the Northern Territories written 2 centuries ago by a scholar named Talia Wren. She was considered plain by her era's standards. Unmarried. Largely ignored by the noble courts." He returned to his seat. Her work shaped our understanding of 3 kingdoms. She is remembered. They are not. Alara looked down at the book in her hands, then up at him. "Why are you being kind to me?" The question was not accusatory. It was genuinely bewildered, the voice of someone who had learned to suspect kindness as a precursor to cruelty. "Because someone should have been kind to you long ago," Ealdric said simply. "And because I have the power to be what others should have been." He appointed her to a position in the Royal Archives, a quiet role cataloguing historical documents and correspondence. It was not grand, but it was respectable, and it came with chambers in the castle, a modest salary, and something she had never possessed, independence. Her stepmother protested, of course. Loudly, publicly, with tears and claims of family loyalty and thinly veiled accusations. Aldrich received her in the throne room, listened with ancient patience to her arguments, and then spoke a single sentence. Your stepdaughter is now under my protection. If harm comes to her, from any direction, I will consider it a personal matter. The stepmother left the castle pale and silent. She did not attempt to contact Alara again. Corinne proved more persistent. She appeared at the archives one afternoon, her smile restored to its familiar sharpness. Playing at importance now, as she asked, examining the dusty shelves with theatrical disdain. Organizing papers for the Monster King. How far you've risen, dear sister. Alara set down the document she had been cataloguing. 6 months ago, she would have absorbed the words silently, allowed them to settle into the familiar ache of worthlessness. But something had changed in those months. Not her nature. She was still quiet, still gentle, still inclined toward shadows rather than sunlight. But the shadows no longer felt like exile. They felt like refuge. He is not a monster, as she said quietly. And I am not playing. Corinne's eyes narrowed. You think this will last? He'll tire of his charity project eventually. They always do. Perhaps. Alara returned to her work. But today, I have purpose. Today, I belong somewhere. And that is enough. Her stepsister stood frozen for a moment, unaccustomed to responses that could not be weaponized. Then she turned and left without another word. Seasons passed. The archives became Alara's domain, organized, catalogued, and loved with the careful attention she had once given only to forgotten gardens. Scholars began requesting her assistance. Historians sought her expertise on obscure references. She published a small monograph on correspondence patterns during the Third Northern War, and it was cited in academic circles throughout the realm. She remained plain. She remained quiet. But she was no longer invisible. Aldrich summoned her to the library every week, ostensibly to discuss archive matters but more often simply to talk. He asked about her discoveries, her thoughts on historical events, her observations about court dynamics. He listened, truly listened, in a way no one ever had. You have never asked me for anything, he observed one evening, as winter deepened beyond the tower windows. Advancement. Wealth. Influence. Others in your position would have made requests months ago. Alara considered the question. I did not come to you seeking favors, Your Majesty. I came because you asked me to dance when no one else would. Everything since has been gift enough. And if I wish to give more? She met his eyes, those ancient, patient eyes that had witnessed centuries of human ambition and frailty. Then I would ask that you give it to someone who needs it more than I do. There are many who stand alone in ballrooms. Many who endure cruelty without breaking. If you wish to give to them. Aldrich was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice held something she had rarely heard in it, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. You understand, he said quietly, why I chose you. That night at the ball. You understand what I saw. I think so. She set down her teacup. You saw someone who had nothing to offer you. No beauty to admire. No power to acquire. No usefulness to exploit. And you chose to help anyway. She paused. That is rare, Your Majesty. Rarer than you perhaps realize. It should not be rare. No. But it is. He rose and crossed to the window, gazing out at the snow-covered mountains that bordered his kingdom. I have ruled for 4 centuries. I have fought wars, forged alliances, built and destroyed empires. But in all that time, the moments I remember most clearly are small ones. A soldier sharing his last bread with an enemy prisoner. A mother walking into fire to reach her child. A serving girl refusing to betray a friend despite threats and bribes. He turned to face her. Courage is not measured in battles won. It is measured in choices made when no one is watching. When there is nothing to gain. When the world offers only reasons not to care. And you saw such courage in me? At the ball? I saw someone who had been told she was worthless all her life, and who still refused to become worthless in response. I saw cruelty received with dignity instead of reflected with more cruelty. His expression softened, not quite a smile, but something near it. I saw what humans are capable of when they choose gentleness over bitterness. Alara felt tears prick her eyes for the first time in years, not tears of pain, but of something she could not name. Recognition, perhaps. Being seen. I did not know I was doing anything remarkable, as she whispered. I was simply, surviving. That, Aldrich said quietly, is precisely what makes it remarkable. Word reached them in spring that Alara's stepmother had fallen ill. A wasting sickness, the physician said, with little hope of recovery. Corinne sent desperate letters, not to Alara, but to the vampire king, begging for intervention, for access to the healing arts his court possessed. Aldrich brought the letters to Alara. They treated you with cruelty, he said. Denied you comfort, dignity, basic kindness. The decision of whether to help them rests with you. Alara read the letters slowly. She thought of cold rooms and harsh words, of grey dresses and invisible corners. She thought of years spent believing she was nothing. And then she thought of her father, how he had loved her stepmother once, how he had hoped they would become a family, how disappointed he would be to see what they had become instead. Send the healers, she said. Aldrich studied her. You are certain? I am not kind because they deserve it. She set the letters aside. I am kind because that is who I choose to be. And I will not let their cruelty decide my choices. The healers were dispatched that afternoon. Her stepmother recovered. She never thanked Alara, never acknowledged the intervention. But she also never spoke ill of her stepdaughter again, and in the silence there was something almost like peace. Years passed like water over ancient stones. Alara grew into herself, still quiet, still plain by court standards, but possessed of a presence that drew scholars and seekers to her archive like moths to candlelight. She became known as the Keeper of Histories, a title she neither sought nor rejected. Aldrich remained her protector, her friend, her steady constant in a world that still did not fully understand why a vampire king had chosen a forgotten girl. When asked, he gave only simple answers. She reminded me why power matters, he would say. Not for what it can take, but for what it can give. On the 10th anniversary of that winter ball, Alara stood at the window of her archive tower, watching the first snow of the season drift down over the castle grounds. She was no longer young, though age had touched her gently. Silver threaded through her dark hair. Lines marked the corners of her eyes, lines of concentration, of laughter, of a life fully lived. Aldrich joined her, unchanged as always, bearing 2 cups of tea. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "About that night." She accepted the tea, warming her hands around the cup. "About what might have happened if you had not crossed the room. You would have survived. You would have endured, as you always did." Survived. Yes. But this, as she gestured at the archive around them, at the life she had built, at the meaning she had found. This I would not have had. And I am grateful. More than I can say. Aldrich stood beside her in comfortable silence, watching the snow fall. "I have been asked many times why I did it," he said finally. "Why I chose you. Why I offered protection to someone who could offer nothing in return." He paused. "I never gave the true answer." "Which is?" "I did not choose you for what you could give me. I chose you because helping you was the right thing to do, and doing the right thing costs nothing when you have lived as long as I have. But failing to do it..." He shook his head slowly. "That cost would have followed me forever. Not because of duty or honor, but because I would have seen cruelty triumph over kindness, and done nothing to prevent it." Alara turned to look at him, this ancient king, this creature of legend, this unlikely guardian who had changed the course of her existence with a single offered hand. "You taught me something," she said quietly. "Something I did not know I needed to learn." "What?" "That being worth protecting is not the same as being worthy of attention. That value does not depend on beauty or usefulness or power. That sometimes the greatest strength is not in standing alone, but in allowing someone to stand beside you." She smiled, and the smile transformed her plain features into something luminous. "You taught me that I was never really nobody. I was simply waiting for someone to see." Aldrich inclined his head, a gesture that in any other context might have been formal, but here, between them, was something closer to acknowledgement, to respect. "And you," he said, "taught me that for centuries is not too late to learn compassion. That power means nothing if it cannot be used to shelter those who need sheltering. That the greatest victory a king can win is not a war, but a single heart, healed." Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft and steady, blanketing the world in white. Inside the archive, surrounded by centuries of recorded history, two souls who had found each other across impossible distances stood together in warmth and silence. Neither of them had sought this connection. Neither of them had expected it. But it had grown anyway, quietly, patiently, inevitably, the way all true things grow. Not through force, not through conquest, but through simple, repeated acts of kindness, offered without expectation, received with gratitude, and multiplied across years into something that neither time nor cruelty could diminish. A vampire king who had learned that strength meant protection. A forgotten girl who had learned that she was worth protecting. And between them, the unspoken truth that neither would have become who they were without the other. Outside, the world continued its endless turning, wars and treaties, loves and losses, the great tapestry of mortal existence weaving itself forward as it always had. But in the northern tower of Valdren Castle, none of that seemed to matter. Here, there was only warmth. Only peace. Only the quiet certainty that some choices echo forever, not because they change history, but because they change hearts. And changed hearts, in the end, are the only histories that truly matter.